A number of years ago, soon after I moved to Canada, Renee and I were living in Victoria, which is where Renee grew up. And I ended up working as a server in a restaurant. And I think some of you know that. I've probably told stories of that over the years. And so I'd become a resident of the country. And we were still about a year or more away from moving over to Vancouver, where I was going to study. So we were just living there for a while. And during that time, Caleb, our firstborn, was born. And this new restaurant opened up just a short distance away from the apartment that we were renting. And so I applied and thought, well, I need to earn a bit of money before we go to Vancouver. And so began working there. And then after we moved to Vancouver, for about 2 years that I was studying at Regent College, I also served in a restaurant in Richmond, the same sort of chain of restaurants. And so during my time as a server, I probably served hundreds of families with young children. And, we were a family with young children, so we were used to going to restaurants from time to time. And if you've ever done that, or if you've ever been in a restaurant and seen it, it can be kind of an interesting time. One of the things that I always notice, and it's quite fascinating about parents that take their young kids into a restaurant, is particularly when the kids get to a certain age, they're quite keen for the kids to place their own order, right? And so, they want them to talk to the server, and they want them to place their order, do something, a little bit grown up, and it's all part of kind of training your kids. And one of the things parents are usually really, really keen on is that the kid says, thank you, right? Say thank you. And, and so you end up having the kids say thank you when you take the order, when you give them the drink, when you put the food down, when you take their plate away. They just thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it's kind of an interesting thing. And I get it. It's trying to teach the kid manners and so on, and that's a really good thing. Now, if you've ever worked as a server in a restaurant, and you know that sometimes the kid's a little bit reluctant to say thank you, maybe they're shy, right, because they don't know you, or maybe they're just way too interested in the coloring that they want to kind of get on with doing, or whatever, for whatever reason, sometimes you might end up standing at the table for an extra 10, 15, 20 seconds or so as you help these people teach their kid to be polite. Well, if you've ever worked in a busy lunchtime or dinner time and you have 10 other tables and these guys want their bill and these guys are waiting for their food and these guys want to place an order and these guys are just grumpy and these ones over here need a refill on the drink, it's like, I don't have another 10 seconds to teach your kid to be polite. However you do it. And it's fine and it's good and I have no problem at all with that. So you just kind of get on with it. Now, one of the fascinating things, though, is this. Sometimes, in fact, many times, more often than you might think, the parents are so keen that the kids say thank you, and they really kind of lean into that, and the kid does say thank you, and then the parents themselves, who bless their hearts, they're harried and busy, and it's like you're getting stuff out of the bag, they won't even give you eye contact. They'll bark their order at you with no thank you. And it's okay, no judgment. Like, I get it, it's a busy time. But a few times I felt like saying, say thank you. But I also wanted a tip, so I never said that. But anyway, it's a fascinating kind of thing, right? The parents want their kids to grow up to be polite. Maybe they feel a certain societal pressure that kids are polite. Maybe they feel certain pressure from grandparents that their kids are going to be polite. Or kids are an ego extension of all of us, and so maybe it's just that they want to look like good parents. There's lots of different reasons that parents do this, but it's always kind of interesting to watch this kind of interaction. And you know what? Many of us are like that. Many of us in our lives know that it's good to have gratitude. It's good to be thankful. And yet, how many times do we take things for granted? It is so easy to take things for granted and not live a life of gratitude. Now, here in North America, you actually take at least one time in the year, and it happens to be this weekend in Canada, where you as a culture pause to express thanks, or at least you should be expressing thanks. The idea is to count all of the blessings in your life and consider what you're thankful for. And people have all kinds of traditions, like, kind of going around the table if you have a big meal with extended family and saying what you're thankful for and all those kind of things. So it's good. But what does a life of gratitude look like, and why should we do it? And why is it that important, other than it's good to be polite? So we're going to dive into a passage this morning, and it is a very untypical passage for a pastor to pick on Thanksgiving Sunday. And you're going to see that as I start to read it. Like, where's he going with this? But hopefully you'll see as we kind of get through it why I'm going where I'm going, and we'll kind of unpack it this morning. So Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 18 and reading through to 23. It's coming up on the screen behind me. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of those who by their wickedness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. So they are without excuse, for though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. There it is. So they didn't honor God, they didn't glorify God, they didn't honor him for who he is, and they didn't say thank you. They didn't thank him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal beings or birds, four-footed animals, or reptiles. It's a reference to idolatry, making little idols of animals and so on, and worshiping them. God's word to us today. So, interesting passage, not a typical Thanksgiving passage, but it's part of Romans 1, and Romans, really sort of is kind of the gospel according to Paul in many ways. People have often called the book that. And so what Paul is doing is writing to the Christians who are living in Rome, the church in Rome, and he's unpacking for them, to begin with, the problem. Humanity has fallen. Humanity is in rebellion. Humanity has this issue. God's wrath has turned against them because of that. And he's going to get to the solution and the sending of Jesus and so on in a bit, a little bit later. In fact, he even says that humanity have fallen short of the glory of God. He says that in chapter 3, like that's a direct quote. He's explaining then that as we're in rebellion, God's wrath has turned on us. And he explains that actually humans are without excuse. Even those humans who have grown up in a country that maybe doesn't have many churches and doesn't have a lot of Christian witness and has never sat down in front of an evangelist and had the gospel explained to them, it seems to be suggesting even they are without excuse because God actually has been made known to them. And what theologians call that is natural revelation. Right? This kind of idea that God has been made known through the very structures of creation itself, so people can look at creation, even if they never hear a Christian preach, they can look at creation, they can discern the Creator through it, and so we're out without excuse. And people will often use that passage and use the theology of natural revelation when they're trying to explain to somebody who said, hey, how come it's so unfair? You were born in a Christian country and your parents were able to take you freely to a church, but what about the people in another country who have never heard the gospel? How come they should be judged by God and they've never been given an opportunity? And people will use this, and it's a lot more complex than just that, but this is what they will use. God can be discerned through creation. And on then goes the story. We're not going through any more of Romans, but eventually we have the righteousness of God revealed. We have Jesus kind of revealed as the solution to the problem. So, a question for you and I this morning out of this passage. Why on earth is thankfulness in there? In a description of the fallenness of humanity, in a description of the rebelliousness of humanity, in a description of how God's wrath has turned against humanity, the two things he mentions are not offering glory to God or not offering honor to God, and I think we can get our heads around that one, and not saying thanks or not being thankful. Does this strike you as a bit of an odd one? Of all the different things he could have picked, why did he pick a lack of thankfulness? It's like built into human rebellion is a lack of gratitude. And I don't know, I just found that interesting as I started to read it. Well, to understand that, we're going to need to step back a little bit more. The passage seems to suggest that God is actually known by all. At the end of the day, every human knows that God exists. Atheists know that God exists. Agnostics know that God exists. Religious people and non-religious people know that God exists. People that practice animistic religions know that God exists. And you might return to me and say, no, they don't. I know loads of people in my life who would say that God doesn't exist, it's just a fairy story. And you'd be right. I know lots of people that say that also. Atheists, by definition, are not theists. A theist is somebody who believes in God. So an atheist is somebody who, by definition, does not believe in God. Well, okay. But I think the passage is saying, no, actually, everybody does believe in God or knows that God exists, except those who are living apart from the grace of God, outside of the grace of God, who don't know Jesus, who have never committed their life to him, so they're living outside of that. We'll take atheists as an example. Romans 1:18 says that they've actually suppressed the truth. They've suppressed that knowledge. So instead of embracing knowledge that is truly available to all, some people have suppressed truth. And later on in the passage, it's going to say they've become futile in their thinking. They're darkened, the minds were darkened, rather. And if you were here last Sunday, you would have heard me say in the passage about, I was preaching about evangelism, there's actually a veil over the minds of many people, so they cannot see the gospel. So you see, God has made himself known to everyone, and it is possible for everyone to know God. But some have suppressed the truth, and their futile minds have become darkened, and they live as though God does not exist, as though they do not believe in God, and in all intents and purposes, they don't believe in God. The truth about God is available, but it's been suppressed so as to be as though God is not real. You see the nuance of that? So, many people have suppressed the truth, or they've grown up in a nation that has suppressed the truth. They would say they don't believe in God despite the fact that he's known to all. Yet many of those same people will actually blame God for all of the problems in the world or the problems in their lives and so on. It kind of hardens this sense of unbelief in them. The idea of God becomes distasteful, abhorrent even, offensive. And then many other things take the place of God in their lives. It could be human ingenuity, it could be human intelligence, it could be some form of sexuality, some other point of cultural reference, human-centered progress. Something else becomes the center of their belief system, and it's usually themselves or something else. And so bringing glory to God and living with thankfulness, those two things that are mentioned, get removed or supplanted, and humans are rightly under the wrath of God. That's another way of describing what Romans 1 is saying. Okay, but we haven't answered our question, have we? Why is glorifying God and being thankful, why are those the two things that are present? Well, let's flip the question and maybe ask, why would they be present to people who are not in rebellion to God? Maybe that's an easier question to answer. Well, I think the first one is easy. I mean, glorifying God, honoring God is a way of saying, I'm expressing who God is and I'm understanding who God is and I'm putting him in his rightful place. To worship God is to ascribe worth to him. So what we did just before I came up here is we ascribed worth to God. That's what worship is. So I think that one we can get, but being thankful, is it just saying we don't regularly enough say thanks? Kind of like a kid in a restaurant? Maybe we don't. But it goes way, way deeper than that. And how deep it goes is going to answer our question for us as to why a lack of gratitude is there, a lack of thankfulness. You see, when we are truly thankful, we're expressing humility. It is very humble to be thankful. It's easy to not be, but it's a humbling thing to go and thank someone for something because you're acknowledging that someone's done something for you. It's a profoundly humble thing to be thankful. A sense of dependence is there when we're thankful. A glad neediness is expressed when we're thankful. Think about it. If you and I live with an understanding that everything we enjoy, the mountains, the lakes, the oceans, food, pleasure, relationships, our homes, everything that we enjoy has the same source. It all comes from the same place. It is a gift of God. If we live like that, when we live with that understanding and not just take everything for granted, we fall before him with gratitude and begin to live a thankful life. It is humble because we know we had nothing to do with it. It's a gift. Every single one of you, since you walked through those glass doors this morning, have taken a certain number of breaths. It is a gift from God. You didn't create oxygen. You didn't create lungs. You did nothing for it. It is a gift of God. When we are fully dependent on him and express a glad neediness, we're expressing a dependence on him. So humility, dependence, and a glad neediness are all connected to thankfulness. And those things sound a little bit like faith, trust. Being thankful is deep. Having gratitude is deep. So when thankfulness fails, when we fail to have gratitude, we run the risk of the opposite all of that being true. Pride beginning to take the place of humility, and humility offers everything to God. Pride turns it all in on ourselves. Pride was at the center of our enemy's fall. Instead of dependence on God, we start to depend on ourselves. I'm a self-made so-and-so. I did this and I've done that and I've made everything work. And it's all about depending on ourselves. No one's going to help me out, but I'm going to pull myself up and I'm going to make it happen. Instead of a glad neediness, we start to develop an ungrateful greed. Instead of faith and trust, we end up on this slippery slope towards a darkened mind and unbelief, which is the reason it's there in a discussion of rebellion. Because to live without thanks takes us down that slippery slope to unbelief. Now it starts to make sense why thankfulness is rooted in Romans chapter 1. I want to spend just a little bit of time in Luke 17, just for a few minutes, as we move towards some application this morning. Coming up on the screen for you is Luke 17, 11 to 19. It says this, and many of you will recognize this story. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And they went, and they were made clean, all 10 of them, healed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner, except this Samaritan?" And then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." The story of the 10 lepers is a fairly well-known one if you've been around the Gospels for any amount of time. And certainly Jesus is using it as a pretty indicted statement against the unbelief of the people of the time, the Israelites, the Jews, and so on. Right? I mean, he's making it pretty clear it was a Samaritan that did the right thing, not the Jewish people. And so he's using it as this kind of typified response by the Israelites of the day who Jesus came to seek and save, but it was the foreigner who responded in the right way, and it's setting it up for the Gentile mission and so on. But quite apart from that purpose, it also teaches us a lot about being thankful. Jesus is highlighting the importance of being thankful towards God for his mercies, and on the surface level, that's good to be thankful. Like our restaurant example, it's good to train one another to be politely thankful. But on a secondary level, we could use this passage, as well as others, to talk about how it's expressing gratitude is more than just something you say to someone who does something nice for you. But it's actually about a fundamental orientation of the heart towards God, and it's living with a certain posture of gratitude in your life, where it just becomes natural. The Samaritan didn't give a second thought, perhaps, to returning to Jesus and falling at his feet and expressing thanks for what he had done. But the other thing that I think is important for us to connect is the connection to faith, just like in Romans 1. Notice how Jesus asked the question, weren't there 10 made clean? Where are the other 9? And then to the Samaritan leper, he says, who was thankful, he says, go on your way, your faith has made you well. And so just like in the Romans 1 passage, where we talked about how thankfulness is to express humility, dependence, and a glad neediness, which we described as a little bit like faith and trust, so here also Jesus connects his thankful expression to faith. So, church family, hopefully what you're picking up from this morning's passages are that being thankful and being grateful and expressing gratitude is maybe more than what we think it was. It's deep. It's an expression of our faith and our trust and our dependence and our level of humility. It gets a lot packed into that understanding. To live with thankfulness and gratitude is to ward off pride. To live without being thankful is, according to Romans 1, part of a rebellion. It's a slippery slope to a darkened mind and futile thinking. And according to Luke 17, it is aligning with a rejection of the kingdom, not its embrace. And so I go as far as saying that thankfulness and gratitude, I think, are at the center of the gospel. Or certainly at the center of our response to the gospel. Our human response to all that God has done, if it does not contain faith, is not trusting or humble, does not express dependence unless it is full of gratitude. So by way of application today, as we think about, okay, what do we do with these passages? Well, the first thing I'd say to you is have grace for yourself. Because I think probably every one of us in this room lacks gratitude at certain times. And so may you know the grace of Jesus, because we all live like that. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't think I'm a very grateful person, does that mean I'm going to become futile in my thinking and have a darkened mind? I'd say, well, don't worry. I think it's a serious challenge, but God is full of grace. And so if you're a person that knows that you lean more intentionally toward pride and self-sufficiency, if you're not particularly trusting or faith-filled, then I just invite you back to the loving arms of the Father, who's just ready to embrace you and dust you off and set you going again. Secondly, let me encourage you to take some time this weekend to honestly assess your level of gratitude in your own life. Do you have a tendency to take things for granted? Do you have a tendency to live with an entitlement? And that one ought to poke every one of us. Because if we've grown up in the West, good chance we're entitled. We think the world owes us a lot, right? Our rights and our this and our that. We are a very entitled people in the West. We think we're owed every kind of creature comfort that can come our way. And so that's one thing we need to wrestle with. An age-old discipline, and you'll notice some of the words I use are actually connected to an old hymn that many of you probably love. An age-old discipline that people have done for years and years is to is to count your blessings and name them before God. And that can be as simple as carving out 20 minutes this weekend and sitting down with a journal and a pen and thinking about all the different ways and writing down all the different ways that you are thankful for your family, for your life, for the blessings that you have, for your relationships, whatever it is. And if you spend about 20 minutes doing that, your list will probably be pretty long. And then what you do is you take that list and you turn it into a prayer of thanksgiving, and maybe you write it out if you like to do that kind of thing, or you just pray it. And it's a prayer of thankfulness, and it's an age-old discipline, but it's actually a very helpful and healthy thing to do for your soul, especially in a world that we usually assume, as I said, we have this absolute right to health and happiness and creature comforts, every single one that we can get our hands on here in the West. And finally, as we close this morning, let me encourage you to take thanksgiving and gratitude beyond just this weekend and into your life as a fundamental orientation towards God in humble, dependent thanks. To be like the Samaritan leper and not the other 9. To be sure that we return to God to offer thanks for answered prayer and blessings, to acknowledge that all good things come from him and live with a posture that is oriented upwards in thankful praise and therefore mitigates against the things that would lead us inward to pride and self-sufficiency. So maybe this Thanksgiving is the jumping point for you, the catapult, the springboard into a new posture. And a helpful way to think about that is this. Just like I said about journaling a moment ago, another thing you can do is start to journal out answers to prayers. And you might think, Jamie, stop talking about journaling. I'm not a journaler. I get it. I'm actually not really much of a journaler either. I'm not talking about journaling every day, but I'm talking about writing a one sentence down with a date every now and again when God answers a prayer. I should tell you 2 things will happen to you. The first one is you'll realize, oh my goodness, how easy it is to forget the wonderful things God does in our lives. It is actually really easy to forget over time. But if you look back over the year, do you know what that will begin to develop in you? Faith. Faith. Absolutely. As we close, I'll give you a funny little example. I was trying to think about this, and I was thinking about different ways in which I take just normal things for granted. And I was thinking about a hot shower in the morning, right? What an incredible gift. Like, seriously, I know it's a gift to everyone else, too. That was a joke. In case I smell. Yeah, okay. You get it. You get it. No, but seriously, do you realize that for most of human history, people have not been able to go into a place in their house where hot, fresh water falls down from the sky and falls onto our bodies and shower? Like, seriously, for most of human history, nobody has ever been able to do that. What an incredible blessing we have to own showers, that fresh, cold and hot water comes into our house. And I was just struck with, wow, I take everything for granted in my life. That's just one tiny, kind of slightly funny thing. So this Thanksgiving, may you start to think about all of those things that you take for granted and begin to practice a life of gratitude and the orientation towards God in that.